Okay, Assalamu alaikum everybody. My apologies to the interactive group. I forgot to email you guys last night just to make sure everyone knew that we are starting at 5 o'clock today. This is going to be our Ramadan starting time on Saturdays. So inshallah, that will hopefully make things a little bit easier. So anyway, Assalamu alaikum everyone, and welcome to Saturday session. I'm really excited for Ramadan to begin. And I wanted to announce, I know we've been talking about fundraising, because fundraising obviously is especially important and exciting during the month of Ramadan to multiply your blessings. And so by Ramadan, we will roll out the surah, sponsor a surah, and some other programs, hopefully. We also are getting ready to launch a few things, hopefully on Launch Good and all of that. So we want to try and make it easier for people to support what we're doing. And inshallah, hopefully raise awareness for these really important projects that we're doing. I thought that I would just sort of repeat. First of all, I wanted to, again, if people have not signed up or subscribed to our weekly email, please do that. And it's just a nice way to get a summary in your email about what we're doing, and then get some musings from some of us here. But I thought, in case people didn't have a chance to read, I just wanted to share just a couple of thoughts that I shared in my weekly email, and that is regarding, Ramadan being a very lonely time for a lot of people, and I know for many converts especially, it's a difficult time, and even for people who are not converts. I've seen so many people write about how difficult it is to not feel a part of the community. And it struck me that, we've been getting really lovely emails from people who reach out and just thank us for what we do, and say that they really appreciate the perspective, really appreciate Dr. Abul Fadl, his, speaking truth to power, saying things that people don't hear anywhere else, and just being grateful that they found us. Like, I get emails from people that say, I just found you a month ago, and I'm so excited to see, to see and hear from you. And it struck me that, all of what I feel is in common to a lot of these messages is a bit of loneliness, because people feel like they really are not getting, a smart, thoughtful, message, of Islam, a presentation of Islam that touches your heart and your intellect. And people, come from all parts of the world, and find us. And, we used to kind of say, when we were in Los Angeles pre-COVID, when people would show up and come to the halakas there, that it was, a little bit unfair to just kind of be in Los Angeles. There would be people who, were interested in what we were doing, but were very far away and couldn't come and visit. But interestingly, after the lockdown and after the pandemic, we really were able to reach a lot of people from around the world. And what struck me is that, all of these people are connected because they are smart, they're thinking, they're searching. And if all of these people were actually in Los Angeles, that would be very unfair, because God would have put all of the same types of seeking people in one place. And I think that when they're all spread out around the world, these are like the seeds of hope that Allah shares throughout the world. And I think with this pandemic, the fact that we can actually connect with these people, and people who come to us and stay with us, are really here not because they're looking for something in Los Angeles, or they don't have a better community or whatever, but they're really searching for something, and they show up time and time again every time we upload a halakha or a khutbah. Because what's very interesting is that every single time that we upload something, immediately within 24 to 48 hours, 250 people immediately watch it. And then it starts to just grow over time, and it just, goes up into the thousands, which is wonderful. But we have obviously a very loyal base that is ready to open and watch the minute we put something up. So to me, that is a really beautiful idea of community. We are connected here by the people who are touched by what we're doing. And so it was, the idea that if we, one day, inshallah, I hope we can all come together and meet in person. But we are not alone when we know that there are people out in the world that really appreciate what we do, that, don't worry about the controversy, that feel like this is the hope and the future for Islam. So I just wanted to share that, because it's hard when you're lonely. We for 20 years we lived in Los Angeles and felt very alone because we were not really connected to the community there. But and so it's a hard time, especially when you have iftars and you have Eid celebrations and you're not invited anywhere. And I know that happens with a lot of people. But if we can all at least feel connected here, even if now virtually, because people are not really meeting so much for COVID, that, just to say, you're not alone, we're here with you, and alhamdulillah that, this is one of the silver linings that comes from the pandemic, is that we've found each other and we've, united on seeking knowledge, seeking beauty, seeking a very ethical message, hopefully a very humanistic message that will help all of us elevate and come closer to God, inshallah. So that's something very special to be grateful for. So with that, I wish everyone a very beautiful Ramadan as you're preparing for the last few days before we start, and looking forward to another wonderful session. Thank you.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen wa subhanallah. العلي العظيم اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه وطلاب إحسان إلى يوم الدين. اللهم اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي يا رب العالمين. Inshallah, we will do Surah Al-Shu'ara, and before I jump into the surah, Surah Al-Shu'ara is actually an opportunity to underscore this, because the way that I approach Surah Al-Shu'ara and the way that I understand it is very different. Let's put it that way. It's very different than what you will find in the traditional tafsir or even Sufi tafsir, because I think that Surah Al-Shu'ara had a critical social ethical message to deliver, and it was not simply about consoling the Prophet ﷺ during a hard time in his journey, as it's often portrayed. And I'll have an opportunity to share with you some of the positions of the traditional tafsir and how this approach differs. But just for whoever is going to be watching this eventually, I want to underscore this point about support. All intellectual projects in a community have to be, in order to have an impact and effect, have to be embraced. They have to be rooted in the society to which they are directed. If socially people don't embrace an intellectual project and they don't empower it, regardless of how brilliant or innovative or new a project might be, it will go nowhere. It will have very little impact. And that's the challenge that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created for all all communities. Is that it is not just a matter of generating or of learning and generating good ideas, but progress is a communal project. And if if a community is not proactive, then ideas just remain isolated and lonely and, for the most part, ineffective. I can comfortably say that this Quranic approach directly addresses, because I believe the Quran is a living revelation. It is revealed, it is newly revealed for each generation, fresh. Each generation has the ability to receive the Quran as a new revelation for its moment and place. The Quran is not revealed to Muhammad ﷺ and that was it. The Quran has to be consistently re-revealed to people in different places and different times. And I think this project is critically important for our ummah. And I sincerely hope that it will live for generations to come. And I sincerely hope that it will find community support. And although we Muslims in the modern age, we are accustomed to spending money on everything but knowledge. That's because of the authoritarian societies from which we come. And authoritarian societies don't socialize people to spend on knowledge, because knowledge is a dangerous thing. And the state wants to control knowledge. And so the state wants to control spending on knowledge. But our parents might have had an excuse, or your parents might have had an excuse. My parents never immigrated to the U.S. They might have had an excuse in that they grew up in societies where the state wants to monopolize spending on knowledge so that they control and have hegemonic influence on the production of knowledge and the production of consciousness and the creation of social epistemology. But for the children of immigrants, leave alone converts, but converts are not in significant numbers yet, unfortunately. But for the children of converts, there is no excuse. There's no excuse anymore, except that their parents unintentionally raised them with the same despotic framework and mindset that they grew up with. Unintentionally, they transmit their despotic paradigms to their children. And among these despotic paradigms is your responsibility is to spend money on yourself and your family, on your taking care of your children, taking care of your home, taking care of whatever. But it is really not directly your moral and ethical and Islamic responsibility to make sure that you participate in a direct and effective way in the projects of the production of knowledge. Production of knowledge are projects. They're projects, meaning it's an entire institution that produces knowledge, not individuals. So regardless of how inspired this Quranic interpretation might be, if people don't get behind it and commit themselves to supporting it and propagating it and spreading it, it will be another lost opportunity for our ummah among a million lost opportunities since the Islamic Khilafah crumbled. and then we're all responsible. Okay, as you will see, what I'm talking about, or this plea for support, is actually directly related to what Surah Al-Shu'ara has to tell us and what it has to teach us. So, Surah Al-Shu'ara is among the surah known as the Tawasim, meaning surah that begin with Ta, Sin, Mim, the Tawasim. And the Tawasim have been described as surah, some have described them even as sort of some have said the liver of the Quran, some kept the Quran, some have said the backbone of the Quran. But clearly, the Tawasim was seen as not as containing messages that are not circumstantial. In other words, they're not messages that address just the historical contingencies confronting the Prophet ﷺ or the early community, but that these are messages intended to have eternal effects and to be studied by generations to come. Moreover, Surah Al-Shu'ara was revealed after a Taha and a Dukhan, which we've covered. And in many ways, Surah Al-Shu'ara can be seen as part of a trio of Taha and a Dukhan and then Shu'ara. And as we'll see, one can argue that Surah Al-Shu'ara completes, it's like a social theoretician producing a systematic social theory. You know, a theoretician might produce it in 3 parts. And if you study Taha and Dukhan and then Shu'ara, you find that it's as if they do come together in a 3-part assemblage of a core ethical message. So it is revealed after surah like Yasin, after Al-Furqan, after Fatir. It is revealed after Maryam. And as I said before, that Surah Maryam is sort of a demarcation point or a significant point in revelation. And then right after Surah Maryam, we have the 3, Taha, Al-Dukhan, and then Al-Shu'ara. And all 3 are addressing a state of perceived desperation, as we will see. In order of revelation, since nearly everyone agrees that it was revealed after Dukhan and before An-Naml, right before An-Naml, since nearly everyone that I've looked at says that it was revealed after Dukhan, before An-Naml, and before Qasas, so that would mean that Surah Al-Shu'ara in order of revelation would be number 47 or so. But yeah, 47. When precisely is Surah Al-Shu'ara in the life of the Prophet ﷺ? Well, it comes at a time that, as we said before, was Taha and Dukhan. Persecution of Muslims has already started, and so Muslims have come out in the open with their message, and Quraysh's reaction got increasingly violent, increasingly hostile, and Quraysh is terrorizing anyone that converts to the Islamic message, and especially those who are powerless, those who are mustadafina fil ard, those who come from lower classes. Lower class people know that if they convert to Islam, they're fair game. They could be grabbed virtually by any of the influential members of Quraysh and tortured, imprisoned. If you are a slave and you convert to Islam, your owner might sell you off to someone who will torture you. Tribes that are coming into Mecca, and Muslims are making it a point to proselytize to visiting tribes, the tribes that are visiting Mecca. But Mecca, Quraysh is making clear that one, that those tribes shouldn't listen to the Prophet, so they actually go wherever there's proselytizing, and they say, we know this man, don't listen to him, this man is insane, or this man is possessed, this man is a liar. But it doesn't stop there, because also Quraysh is making it clear that if you incline towards this new, if you incline towards Muslims, then you are on unfavorable terms with Quraysh, which means that will affect your commercial interests in Mecca, that will affect your trade, that will affect the willingness of Quraysh to provide you services. And as you know, tribes are trading. They travel in the desert. Mecca is a resting, it's Las Vegas. People stop there for rest and enjoyment as they prepare to either go to the Indian route, or if they're going south to the Yemen route, or if they're going to Syria, to Sham, or if they're going to Egypt. It's an important stopping point. And so if you don't get services, that's going to affect everything in your life. So whether Mecca is happy with you or not happy with you has serious consequences. And the effect of all of this is that the number of Muslims is remaining constant and unchanging. Regardless of the exhaustive efforts of the Prophet ﷺ and the companions, people are terrified, people are scared to embrace the new religion. And so the number of Muslims is as if frozen. No one is coming in, or no new converts. And that is very worrisome to the Prophet. Because if the numbers don't grow, then what's going to become of the Islamic message? And the test of Al-Isra wal-Mi'raj didn't come yet. Because when it comes, Muslims are going to shed even more people. But there's another element. And this is something that we touch upon right away. when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala then is telling the Prophet, لَعَلَّكَ بَاخِعٌ نَفْسَكَ, we know that you are tormenting yourself, that they are not believers. Meaning what? Meaning that the Prophet is in real agony. We already saw an aspect of this agony in Surah Taha. And that same expression, بَاخِعٌ نَفْسَكَ, will be repeated again in Surah Al-Kahf, the cave. But here in Al-Shu'ara, the Prophet is in agony not just because he is trying everything and it's not working, but because he is genuinely worried about these people. One of the things that we don't talk about in the seerah a lot is that the Prophet was emotionally vested in his community. He cared. He cared, and he cared a great deal. This of course will be for another situation, another day. He cared, so he's often mediating even conflicts between people in Mecca, poor people, and others, not necessarily Muslim. But he, knowing fully well that he is a prophet and that this is the truth, that the fact that his people are turning away from it is disastrous. For someone like the Prophet, he doesn't see the world. I mean, if you can imagine the greatest Sufi master that there is, and the greatest Sufi sees the world, when he thinks of the world, the hereafter is a pressing and an immediate reality. If in your life you caught a glimpse of the world of Barzakh, the world between the hereafter and the now, if you caught a glimpse of the world of Barzakh, it leaves you changed forever. Once you catch a glimpse of the world of Barzakh, and not even the hereafter, just the world of Barzakh, it's as if you are just counting. It's as if every day that passes you say, okay, I'm getting close to that reality that I saw. Now, can you imagine the Prophet ﷺ, who, to him, the world of ghaib, the unseen world, is the world that he engaged and he knows to be true. And so he knows the fate of those who are turning away, and that is hurting him. But hurting him to the point that when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala uses that expression, بَاخِعٌ نَفْسَكَ, بَاخِعٌ نَفْسَكَ means not just that you are in pain, but you are in such pain, you are in so much pain that it's nearly killing you. Al-bakh is Bakha'atul Baqarah means I slaughtered the cow. Bakha'un Nafsak means you're about to kill yourself. And this is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala telling the Prophet, I know you are about to kill yourself because you are so hurt by the fact or upset by the fact that they are not believing you and that they are not accepting the truth. A critical point that inshallah if we ever do the seerah project, we'll have a lot more to say about. But the Prophet ﷺ did not look at his people with disdain. He did not look at those kuffar that we call the kuffar, the infidels, as his enemy. He didn't look at them with arrogance or some type of vehemence. He loved them. He cared deeply about them. And we see this in so many narratives about the Prophet in Mecca. And because he cared so much about them, it broke his heart that people that he loved and cared about, some of the people were he grew up with as his best friends, that we'll leave that to. And so he's agonizing. And part of what is taking place with the Prophet ﷺ in Bakh al-Nafs is that he is constantly thinking about all the ways that maybe he could do it better. When you have someone who's very sincere and trying very hard and it's not working, what do sincere people do? They blame themselves. And they look within and they say, you know, the problem must be me. And it must be that I'm failing. Because it's not working. And here, as we'll see, the divine intervention is not just, as the traditional commentators say, to comfort the Prophet ﷺ, but as we will see, it is to convey a critical, moral, social, ethical message that will resonate through the centuries. This is a heavy surah, and I wanted an army of people online, and I don't have an army of people online, so I am bakh on nafsi.
Oh no.
I'm in a state of bakh. Complete bakh. My demons are telling me I'm a failure. Shall we start?
Yes.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Allahumma salli wa sallim wa barik ala Muhammad ya Rabbi. Allahumma shrah li sadri wa yassir li amri. Okay. So Surah Al-Shu'ara is another one of these surah that is an event. It's an entire event, as inshallah we'll see. And before we delve in, look at the end of the surah. Go to verse 217. وتوكل على العزيز الرحيم الذي يراك حين تقوم وتقلبك في الساجدين إنه هو السميع العليم هل أنبئكم على من تنزل الشياطين تنزل على كل أفاك أثيم يلقون السمع وأكثرهم كاذبون والشعراء يتبعهم الغاوون. The name of the surah, of course, comes from the mention of the Shu'ara, the poets, in 2:4. But these last verses, towards the end of the surah, Tawakkal al-Aziz al-Rahim, turn and rely on the Aziz and the Rahim, and we'll see the significance of this. Allah as the Aziz and Allah as the Rahim. Allah, the height of glory, the glorified, the center of everything, the anchor of everything, the beginning and the end of everything. But the embodiment of mercy itself. And that God sees you as an individual, as a human being, as a person. وَتَقَلُّبَكَ فِي السَّاجِدِينَ, and sees you as you pray and you prostrate and you plead, and sees your pain, and sees your worries, and sees your anxieties, and sees every moment and every breath of the life that you live, and especially as you turn to Allah and say, guide me. تَقَلُّبَكَ فِي السَّاجِدِينَ. Let's see how they translated it. So the study Quran translates it as, who sees you when you stand to pray and the movement amid those who prostrate. Yeah, I mean, تَقَلُّبَكَ could mean your movement as you prostrate, but تَقَلُّبَكَ is, تَقَلُّب الإنسان is not just movement, but it connotes a sense of tension and anxiety. So it is as if Allah is saying, I see you when you pleadingly prostrate. When you prostrate, turning with your concerns, your worries, your anxieties to Allah. For Allah is the one who knows and who hears. And then that rhetorical question, shall I tell you who among you is guided by Satans? Who actually is visited by Satans, visited by demons, whether they realize it or not? Well, كل أفاك أثيم. The afak and the athim, especially those afak athim are, an afak is a deceitful, hypocritical, lying person. Whether that person lies to himself or to others, that's an afak. A person whose life is anchored in double standards, lies, mirage. If you are fundamentally a person who's not truthful with yourself and others, you are an afak and an athim. And as we will see, it also refers to those who claim to have knowledge of the world of ghaib. But it is broader than that. In other words, those who are fortune tellers and so on. It applies to those people as well, as we will see. And the shayateen try to empower those that are open to them with things that will affirm their sense of righteousness and make them feel that they are pursuing a good path, a decent path. All those people that say, for instance, that, well, we don't need to be Muslim, we'll just be theists. I think that's directly demonic. Among the mirages of the devil, and the way that the devil tells you, well, you know, you're okay. It's fine, you're okay. You don't have to change your life, to commit to those people who are advocating a message. You're fine. Let them be so obsessed with their messages. Let Muhammad and his ilk and his type, you know, you're okay, you're fine. Now, why do I mention the end of the surah at the beginning? Because Surah Al-Shu'ara, as we will see, is very unusual in that this entire thing that I just mentioned, from 217 to 223, is the dhikr for the surah. When I was praying on Surah Al-Shu'ara, to understand Surah Al-Shu'ara, I was literally praying that I understand what it means by demons descending to affect the way that people think and feel. And I was praying that Allah not contaminate or not allow my thinking about Surah Al-Shu'ara to be contaminated by demonic influences. And I was praying that my understanding of Surah Al-Shu'ara would come directly from the divine, from a pure and glorious source, from the Aziz al-Rahim. Okay. So again, before Surah Al-Shu'ara is unusual because it requires these introductions. And as you know, I usually just jump into the surah first, ayah, and so on and so forth. But before I do, what is distinctive about Surah Al-Shu'ara is that it comes in and it acknowledges the Prophet's pain, alayhi salatu wassalam. Not just his pain, but the fact that he is in such pain that he might literally be killing himself. Again, we don't pay attention in the seerah to these little things. But it acknowledges it, and it acknowledges the fact that he is blaming himself. But then it proceeds to tell him 7 stories about 7 prophets, one after the other. And we know that the Quran does this. We've encountered it in Surah Maryam when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَاذْكُرْ فِي الكِّتَابِ وَاذْكُرْ and so on, remember. But in Surah Al-Shu'ara, there is something different. Each of the 7 prophets, the way the Quran tells us about their message is that it uses exactly the same language, as we will see, again and again and again, with a material difference. So we have the story of Musa, Ibrahim, Nuh, Hud, Salih, Lut, and Shu'aib. These are the 7, one after the other. Musa, Ibrahim, Nuh, Hud, Salih, Lut, Shu'aib. But we notice something very interesting. In 6 of the 7, the Quran describes the relationship between the Prophet and his people as akhuhum. Is qala lahum akhuhum, their brother. It does this with all the Prophet except Shu'aib. If you're paying attention, you say, okay, so why? So that's one. But 2 is that the way it tells the story of each prophet is designed to communicate a message. And as we will see, it's a very coherent and powerful message. But it is an entirely educational message to the Prophet ﷺ, and of course to anyone who studies the Quran, ending with this comment about the Shu'ara, the poets. And if you're paying attention, you'd say, well, what is the relationship between the 7 stories with the 7 prophets and that reference to the poets at the end? Of course, understanding that the role of poetry and poets at the time of the Prophet ﷺ in Arab culture was enormous. Poets were the entertainers. Poets were the PR people. Poets controlled the propaganda. In the same way that in our day and age, rock and roll music, affects people's attitudes, and affects the way they relate to the world. Poetry played that role in that culture. And very importantly, poetry defined the fashions of the age. And that, again, if we're paying attention, we ask the question, well, how does this relate to the 7 stories and the 7 prophets, and to the agony that the Prophet ﷺ himself is feeling? Okay. Now that we set it up this way, we can jump into Surah Al-Shu'ara. And we know that Surah Al-Shu'ara starts with Ta, Sin, Mim. And it is and we confront the same thing, is that we don't really know, as Ibn Abbas said, that no one really knows what Ta, Sin, Mim means. He says عجزت العلماء عن تفسير Ta, Sin, Mim. However, there you find, especially in Sufi-esque traditions, a lot of reports about what Ta, Sin, Mim means. So among the most famous ones is that Ta refers to Al-Tahir, to the Prophet ﷺ himself as the Tahir, the pure. And Sin refers to As-Salam, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as the Salam, the essence of all peace and tranquility. Wal-Muhit, and Mim refers to Al-Muhit, another one of Allah's names, Al-Muhit is the one that knows all and encompasses all. Among the Sufis that are closer to the Ibn Arabi tradition said that Ta' Sin Mim refers to the Tawl al-Quddus al-Malik. So, and first Ta' is for Tawl, means the everlasting and the all durable, the one who doesn't change, the sustainer of all. And Sin refers to Sana'illah, or Qudsillah, the sacredness and the holiness and the purity of the divine. And Mim to Mulkillah, the kingdom of God. And there is in this type of literature a lot of discussions about how these letters relate to other letters in the Quran, and that if you truly understand and internalize the meaning of these letters, the process of irtiqa and the process of spiritual transformation is extremely powerful, and so on and so forth. So you could spend a lot of time talking about these symbols and the meaning of these symbols, and so on. And as we are accustomed to, that after these letters, the Quran often refers to itself as a clear and decisive message. So, تلك آيات الكتاب المبين. These are the ayat, the signs, or it could even refer, ayat could mean the ayah, verse, or these are the pronouncements, the proclamations of Al-Kitab al-Mubin, the decisive. Mubin means something that clarifies and explains and makes and crystallizes. So we say that it's not a clear book, sure, but Al-Kitab al-Mubin, it is the book that makes the difference between right and wrong, between falsehood and truth. And right after that is Allah's acknowledgement, لَعَلَّكَ بَاخِعٌ نَفْسَكَ أَلَّا يَكُونُوا مُؤْمِنِينَ. Allah knows that you are nearly killing yourself with sorrow because they are not believing. And right away Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala then tells the Prophet that, remember, and this is something that we encounter several times, or a repeated reference in the Quran, that إن نشأ ننزل عليهم من السماء آية فظلت أعناقهم لها خاضعين. That if we wished, we could have taken choice away from them. And not only that, but we could have forced them into a type of behavior that constitutes complete humility and obedience to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If Allah willed, Allah could have created that reality where instead of pompousness and arrogance and all the whims that human beings indulge in, that could all have been created, taken away, and you could have found these human beings, these same human beings, walking around like zombies, acknowledging only one reality and one truth. And the clear implication in this is Allah, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala repeatedly tells the Prophet, again and again, in numerous circumstances. This is not the case, and it's not the case not because God is oblivious to it or because God is forgetful. The fact that they defy, the fact that they turn away, the fact that they disbelieve, this is what God has willed. In other words, the fact that they have the choice. This is because God wants them to have the choice. So, it is not up to you. And your sadness is misplaced because this is the process that Allah wills, that Allah wants. Now, but Allah tells the Prophet, I know that it's not just that they disbelieve you, but I know that they go beyond that and they mock you. That every time there is a new revelation, every time there's a new message, it's painful for you as you see them mocking you and making fun of it, and making fun of God's words, and making fun of your role, and making fun of the entire thing, as if you deal with it as if it is the most important thing in life. There's nothing more important. But they deal with it as if it is silly and marginal and tangential. And then in the same fashion that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala frequently does in the Quran, yes, remember that in due time, they'll get to know what the truth is. In due time, they're going to pay for their mockery. But right away, the Quran goes back to effectively, after acknowledging that they're mocking, effectively reaffirming the choice. Reaffirming the choice. How? By saying, أَوَلَمْ يَرَوْا إِلَى الْأَرْضِ كَمْ أَنْبَتْنَا فِيهَا مِنْ كُلِّ زَوْجٍ كَرِيمٍ إِنَّ فِي ذَلِكَ لَآيَةً وَمَا كَانَ أَكْثَرُهُم مُؤْمِنِينَ وَإِنَّ رَبَّكَ لَهُوَ الْعَزِيزُ الرَّحِيمُ. Don't they see that we've created كل زوج here means صنف or نوع, a type. We've created all types of the immense variety of things that grow on this earth. Allah often points to the fact, the variety of life itself, whether plants or otherwise, the enormity or the how enormous the variety in life itself as proof of the divine. That this, in the irony is that, you know, in in evolutionary theory, variety of life is often cited as proof of evolution, while Allah cites that same variety as proof of a divine creator. As if Allah is saying, look, the fact that I create things that can adapt to their environments, it's because there's someone who is designing this adaptability. But right away, إن في ذلك لآية وما كان أكثرهم مؤمنين. Now, in this is the sign, but most of them will not believe. وَإِنَّ رَبَّكَ لَهُوَ الْعَزِيزُ الرَّحِيمُ. Now, where did we encounter Aziz Rahim? We've encountered it at the end of the surah. This expression, this very expression that إِنَّ فِي ذَلِكَ لَآيَةً وَمَا كَانَ أَكْثَرُهُم مُؤْمِنِينَ, that in this is a sign, and most of them will not believe, and that Allah remains the Aziz, the majestic, and the Rahim, the merciful, will be repeated in the surah time and again, 8 times, that same expression. We're gonna encounter it with every narrative of the prophets that Allah gives us, the 7 plus 1. So, encountered in Ayah 67 and 103 and 121 and 139 and so on. And we'll see that. So, this is fascinating, right? Allah is going to tell us about the story of each of these prophets, and every time that Allah tells the story, Allah will remind us that the majority will not believe. That although the signs are clear, the evidence is clear, the majority will not believe. And every time Allah will affirm that Allah remains Al-Aziz Ar-Rahim, the majestic and the merciful. Allah's tolerance, Allah's putting up with the attitudes and the arrogance of human beings is remarkable. That is truly the merciful. But the fact is, it is the mercy extended by the confidence of the all-powerful, the majestic, Al-Aziz. It's like, I indulge you, and you think that you are a big deal, and the world begins and ends with you. The truth of the matter is, you're a flicker. You're so small. You're nothing. Except for what value you attain through me, the divine. Without me, you're just like any other phenomena that appears in my creation and evaporates. It's like you're a poof. You come and go. You flicker and go. But with me, that is meaning. Because in reality, the only meaning in this entire creation is the creator of creation. Everything is fascinating dimensions, fascinating array of what appears like an endless amount of diversity. In this endless amount of diversity that is constantly in state of flux and change and transformation, there's only one constant, one permanent, one unchanging, and that's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You either realize this or you don't. And if you don't, then there is nothing that pillars you to anything. There is no base for stability. If you do, okay. So, right after وَإِنَّ رَبَّكَ لَهُوَ الْعَزِيزُ الرَّحِيمُ, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala starts into the telling of the stories of the prophets. Now, in Surah Al-Shu'ara, we get, for some of the prophets, again, typical of Quranic style, certain details are mentioned that might have not been mentioned in previous surah, while other details are not mentioned that will be mentioned in later surah. So, for instance, Surah Al-Qasas, which means literally the stories, which tells a lot of the stories of the prophets, will mention details that Surah Al-Shu'ara did not mention. And Surah Al-Qasas is revealed relatively shortly after Al-Shu'ara. But paying attention to what details are mentioned and what details are not mentioned is the way that you truly understand the message of the Quran. If you understand that everything in the Quran is meticulously calibrated by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to communicate meaning, then you start a real relationship with the Quran. If you don't understand that, then the Quran will remain alien to you. Okay. So, Allah is telling the Prophet ﷺ, Moses, we know that Moses is lost in the desert after he left the city of Midian with his wife and his small family, and he sees a fire. In Surah Al-Shu'ara, we're not told about the fire, but we know that from previous surahs that when Allah calls upon Moses and says, you have a mission, and Allah does so at a point after Moses had fled Egypt, went to Midian, lived in Midian for a long time, working a hard job, and then he tries to go back to Egypt to see his mother, who Moses was very close to. And at that point, when he gets the message, Moses is worried. His reaction when he gets the call is that I've lived, and there are different reports about how long he lived with the Pharaoh, in the palace of the Pharaoh. I lived with these people. Some reports say till he was 18 years old. Others says no, until he was in his 20s. Others say it was as much as or as long as until he was 30. There's no way that we can know for sure. But, I know these people. And I know how grand and mighty and arrogant the Pharaoh is. And his entourage. It is not just the Pharaoh, but it is the culture that the Pharaoh created. And I am worried that I will not be able to speak as eloquently and as effectively. And in fact, Moses, at one point in Surah Al-Qasas, he tells Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, I fear that they will just outright kill me. These people are despots, and these people are ruthless. And Moses requests that he has the support and the companionship of his brother Harun. Aaron, right? Harun at the time is in Egypt. And for him to come join Moses, so Moses will actually, and interestingly, Harun is Moses' half-brother. And he is known to be a more a charismatic fellow than Moses. Moses is more studious, more serious, while Harun is more charismatic, more eloquent. And in the traditions, you find some very interesting material about the role of Moses' mother, by the way. Which is not mentioned in the Quran, but that she worries enormously when she realizes that her now Aaron, both her sons, are going to go up against the Pharaoh, and she is in a very anxious state, and she pleads to Allah to protect them, and then that Allah doesn't send her an angel or anything like that, but that she finally gets a sense of repose after many sleepless nights, that just wait and see when they arrive and enter Egypt. In the traditions, because we don't think about these prophets as human beings, but they were. So Moses and Aaron are coming into Egypt. And of course, remember, the Pharaoh and his wife know Moses. They raised them in their palace. But the Pharaoh also know that Moses left without permission after he had killed a man in a fight, killed an Egyptian man in a fight, and went and disappeared for 10 years. And the Pharaoh is angry about this. You ran away, we raised you, we fed you, we took care of you, and then you suddenly disappeared on us. You went, lived, God knows where, and now that you come back and you reappear with this brother of yours that we didn't raise and we don't know anything about, and you want an audience with us. In the traditions, they say that Moses was forced to wait an entire year before being allowed an audience with the Pharaoh. Now, why do I mention this? Because if true, I want you to imagine, put yourself in the shoes of Aaron and Moses for that year. You're just waiting around. What doubts came to them? Did they despair? Did they say, we're sick and tired of waiting? God, for a whole year we've done nothing but just wait for an audience? I mean, these were human beings interacting with other human beings. So, when Musa tells, alayhi salam, tells Allah reminds Musa simply that I am with you and I hear all. And the language here is noteworthy, because when Musa says, وَلَهُمْ عَلَيَّ ذَنْبٌ فَأَخَافُ أَن يَقْتُلُونَ, I'm worried that I might even be killed. And simply the response from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, قَالَ كَلَّا, no. It's as if, I know you have all these things that will preoccupy you, but these are things that you are simply as my messenger to put aside and carry the mission. So just simply know, go with our message, and I am with you, I hear all. Okay. So we know that Moses then confronts the Pharaoh, and we know in the narrative of Surah Al-Shu'ara that Moses says, I want you to allow the people, the Israelites, to leave. Why allow the Israelites to leave? Because for years the Israelites were enslaved in Egypt and were a systematically oppressed people. And they were oppressed as a race inferior to the Egyptians. So there was racial oppression in this dynamic. The Pharaoh was thoroughly authoritarian, and in fact was known for his horrible prisons, as he will threaten Moses with prison, as Surah Al-Shu'ara tells us. His prisons were basically a hole in the ground that you're dropped in, and that's it. You stay there until you perish, and when they give you food or water, they basically drop it in, so you don't have no human contact, no sanitation. Anyway, very authoritarian, but on top of that, he oppressed races of people as inferior to the Egyptians. And Musa alayhi salam says, you've oppressed the Israelites enough, I want you to allow them to leave with me. And as Surah Al-Shu'ara tells us, the response of the Pharaoh is, this is what I get from you after we've raised you, we've took care of you. This is how you pay me back. قال ألم نربك فينا وليدا ولبست فينا من عمرك سنين. Didn't we raise you? And you've spent years with us. And then وفعلت فعلتك التي فعلت وأنت من الكافرين. And you even committed an offense where you've killed someone. وأنت من الكافرين. It's like saying, and you were ungrateful. Like, this is the way you pay us back for raising you and taking care of you? The response of Musa alayhi salam is twofold. One, to admit that the accidental killing, when he struck someone in anger and accidentally killed him, was wrong. So he says, قَدْ فَعَلْتُهَا إِذًا وَأَنَا مِنَ الضَّالِّينَ. This is verse number 20. I admit, I was wrong when I struck this person in anger. And I admit that I was scared of you. I was scared of what you would do to me, because I know you're racists, and I know that you look at me as an Israelite, and as an Israelite, I'm inferior to an Egyptian. And the fact that an Israelite struck an Egyptian in your laws, in your system, is unforgivable. And that terrorized me, and I ran away. But note here the subtleties, the nuances, the beauty in the subtleties and the nuances. But I am a different person now. فَفَرَرْتُ مِنْكُمْ لَمَّا خِفْتُكُمْ فَوَهَبَ لِي رَبِّي حُكْمًا وَجَعَلْنِي مِنَ الْمُرْسَلِينَ. But I am a different person now. I have grown, and Allah has chosen me. And then he says, وَتِلْكَ نِعْمَةٌ تَمُنُّهَا عَلَيَّ أَنْ عَبَّدْتَ بَنِي إِسْرَائِيلَ. And you are saying I should be grateful to you while you have enslaved the Israelites? There is a message here that is very important. Despots and authoritarians will often obfuscate points of justice by talking about all the things that you should be grateful for, and therefore you should acquiesce and accept your station in life. Imagine this in the modern age. It would unfold like this. You have stability, you have a life, you have this, so you shouldn't raise this issue about oppression and who's oppressed and who's suffering. Because if you do, as we will see, there will be instability. So you should be grateful for what you have and shut up. But look how Moses responds. No, I'm not going to shut up. Yes, you raised me. Yes, you've taken care of me. But the fact that you have doesn't in any way mitigate the fact that you are a despot, and doesn't mitigate your injustice. It doesn't make it right. And just for my own whatever favors you bestowed upon me, it doesn't mean that I will relinquish a higher cause because I should be grateful for what I got from you. Now these details, these specific details, are only given in Surah Al-Shu'ara, and we'll see why. So, but Moses is not just saying release the Israelites. Moses is saying your claim, your justification for supremacy over human beings and your justification for authoritarianism and your justification for racism is completely flawed. Why? Because in the theology of the Pharaoh, they believed, while they believed that there are gods up in the heavens, not a single god, but gods, they believed that a god, the most powerful god, hulul, how do you translate hulul?
Dissolving.
It is embodied,
Or encompassing.
like merges into. Yeah, a god, part of that god, of the divinity of that god, goes into the Pharaoh. So that the Pharaoh is a god, not in the sense that the Pharaoh is the only god, but in the sense that within the Pharaoh is divinity. And that is why the Pharaoh sees himself as divinely guided. Now, the remarkable thing is most despots see themselves as guided, either by divinity or by something, but they're completely convinced that they see what others don't see, they know what others don't know, they have a right to impose their way. And the Pharaoh's reaction to Moses is the reaction of arrogant and powerful people, is to say, look at this guy. Look at what he's saying. He's talking about a God that would make my claim of being always right and my laws being right illegitimate. This person is insane. قال إن رسولكم الذي أرسل إليكم لمجنون. This guy that claims to be a messenger is insane. This is 27. And initially he threatens Moses with going in one of these pits of hell, being thrown in prison, being thrown in one of these cells dug deep in the ground. And Moses does something that engages what was in that day and age the way that, how do I put it, PR was conducted. The PR machine of that day and age was conducted by magicians and tricksters. They were the ones that defined for people, and in fact the pharaohs were well known. This past week or something, Sisi spent in Egypt £1 billion Egyptian pounds on a huge carnival where he transported a bunch of mummies. Well, this goes back all the way to the pharaohs of Moses, where you put on a show, and the show dazzles people, and the show defines fashions, and defines tastes, and the fashions and the tastes are defined, lo and behold, all affirm the institutional structure that the Pharaoh, the elite class, has put into place. It affirms the classes, it affirms the races, it affirms the elitism, and the spin masters of this, the people who do all the PR, those who spin the narrative, are the magicians. So when Moses engages that, I'll use the word epistemology, engages the epistemology of that age. This is eventually, Mafaz is writing a dissertation on epistemologies. So if eventually she listens to this halaqah, that's why I wanted her to be here. It engages the epistemology of the age. What is the epistemology of the age? Epistemology of the age is not a Quran. Moses, having an eloquent book, is not going to speak the language of the age. The language of the age is magic. And so Moses, through Allah, gives them the ability to pull a trick or two. A snake that will terrify the Pharaoh. There are reports that the snake even snapped at the Pharaoh. And to pull out a hand that glows, a luminous hand. And the Pharaoh looks at this and say, wow, there's someone who has a technology, PR technology. This is like hiring one of the lobby groups and the PR firms in New York City these days, right? You give them millions of dollars to do PR. Well, Moses looks and says, wow, where did this technology come from? No, I better get my people. And I better prove that we are better, because you have someone that can produce a fashion show, can dazzle the minds and eyes in ways that better than we as an institution, as an authoritarian institution can. That's dangerous. Do you get the point? So, remarkably, instead of killing Musa or imprisoning Musa, although he was imprisoned, in other words, him and Aaron were not allowed to leave. And they were not put in a pit in the ground, but put in a prison as they awaited the day where their show is going to go against the show of the magicians of the Pharaoh. It is the arrogance and the confidence of the Pharaoh who will say, well, we raised this guy, and we know that this guy is no brilliant master of PR. So whatever trick he must have learned wherever he went in Midian, it can't be better than ours. And apparently that's why the Pharaoh doesn't kill Moses right out, or just simply put him in a prison forever, as the Pharaoh regularly does with people who dissent. Okay. So, in the one of the little things that we should take note of, no, there are several, but anyway, let's Note, this is verse 35. When Moses first encounters the tricks, when the Pharaoh first encounters the tricks that Musa alayhi salam presents, you say, قال للملأ حوله إن هذا لساحر عليم يريد أن يخرجكم من أرضكم بسحره فماذا تأمرون. So this is 35. It says, look, this is a competent, powerful sorcerer. And then he says, who desires to expel you from your land with his sorcery. So, ماذا تأمرون is not what do you command, is so what do you think we should do? Now, you shouldn't pass over this. Why? Who wants to expel you from your land? What is he talking about? Is he talking about, look how deliberately the Pharaoh misrepresents Musa's mission. Exactly like dictators and authoritarians always do. If he's talking about the Israelites, well, the Israelites are enslaved, and yet when the Pharaoh talks to them, refers to this as your land. In the same way, like, for instance, the Israelis will talk to the Palestinians as if their rights are protected, while in fact, they're treated like garbage. That's sort of classic, the way oppressors deal with the oppressed. Or he's talking to Egyptians, and in this case, he's creating a boogeyman. He's trying to tell the Egyptians, look, this guy is a danger against national security. In our language today, he's a terrorist. Look, why is he a danger to national security and a terrorist? He could, the next thing we know, he could be chasing Egyptians out of Egypt. And of course, if you know anything about how despots and dictators actually act, this is remarkable. Nothing has changed in thousands of years. The same people who inhabit the same part of the world are still hypnotized by pharaohs in the same way that they used to be hypnotized thousands of years ago, and still led by pharaohs in the same exact. Anyway, okay, so we know then what happens. What Moses presents far outweighs or far outperforms the PR of the other magicians. The magicians know that this is not the same genre of work. They know that this is not tricks of the eye, and this man is coming with something that's a paradigm shift. It's something that is divinely. So they follow Musa, and as a result, the Pharaoh tortures them and puts them to death. And we know that then the story, in the interest of time, I'm going to just move a bit faster and say that the story of where they go to the Red Sea and the parting of the Red Sea and the drowning of the Pharaoh. So, make a mental note. This narrative, a prophet who cared about his people, described as akhuhum, as their brother, and this prophet confronts an ailment. What is the ailment that this prophet confronts? Well, at a minimum, racism, but also if you will, an exacerbated or an extreme condition of elitism. The Pharaoh is the undisputed ruler who accepts no challenge and no disagreement. So keep that in mind. Story number one. Do I miss it? Oh, okay, I better move faster. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. So the sin of the people of Moses, the opponents of Moses, is racism and enslavement. And استعبدت Bani Israel, that you've enslaved people. Okay. Another thing to just notice in 49, the sort of the anatomy of despotism is amazing. When the Pharaoh turns to the magicians and says, قال أأمنتم له قبل أن آذن لكم, you believe before I give you permission? This is like the classic despot. It's like, you're not allowed to believe unless I give you permission to believe in someone. You're not allowed to be impressed. You're not allowed to have an opinion. You're not allowed unless I give you permission. And so, of course, when the Pharaoh turns to his people and says, فَمَاذَا تَأْمُرُونَ, what do you think we should do? Quranic commentators actually write about this and say, the Pharaoh is not taking anyone's opinion. It's an act that despot, it's sort of like a theater that despots perform, where they pretend to take someone's opinion. But in reality, that is done for the sole purpose of PR. Again, it's you put on a performance. So we get to when, of course, Allah saves Musa alayhi salam and his followers, and this is in verse 67, where we get that same refrain, إِنَّ فِي ذَلِكَ لَآيَةٌ وَمَا كَانَ أَكْثَرُهُم مُؤْمِنِينَ. In this is a sign, and most will not believe. وَإِنَّ رَبَّكَ لَهُوَ الْعَزِيزُ الرَّحِيمُ. So we get, and your Lord is Aziz and Rahim, majestic and merciful, and from that we get a transition to Ibrahim. And what does Ibrahim, the core of what Ibrahim is going to be telling his people is exactly what we encounter again in all 7 narratives. Ibrahim is confronting his people, and especially he has a very close relationship with his father Azar, and when he engages his people and he says, what you're doing is absurd. You are worshiping symbols of divinity in the hope that they would intercede for you with the divine. Their response to him is, this is what we found our forefathers doing. This is our culture. These are our traditions. These are our habits. Don't ask us to change. And Ibrahim then utters what becomes one of the most famous prayers in the Quran, where he says, الذي خلقني فهو يهدين والذي هو يطعمني ويسقين وإذا مرضت فهو يشفين والذي يميتني ثم يحيين والذي أطمع أن يغفر لي خطيئتي يوم الدين ربي هب لي حكما والحقني بالصالحين واجعل لي لسان صدق في الآخرين واجعلني من ورثة جنة النعيم واغفر لأبي إنه كان من الضالين ولا تخزني يوم يبعثون يوم لا ينفع مالا ولا بنون إلا من أتى الله بقلب سليم. So the supplication or the prayer that the Quran repeats on behalf of Ibrahim, this is from 77 all the way to 89, some of the most tender and beautiful prayers ever uttered, where Ibrahim alayhi salam says, as to me, I worship Allah who feeds me, who heals me if I'm ill, who ultimately gives me life and death, who controls life and death, who will forgive, or who I hope will forgive my sins in the hereafter. And then Ibrahim alayhi salam prays that Allah grants him hukman wal-hiqni bis-salihin, grants him wisdom, and that Allah always keeps him in the company of the good. وَاجْعَلْ لِي لِسَانَ صِدْقٍ فِي الْآخَرِينَ, that, and make my memory a memory of truth and goodness in the generations to come. وَاجْعَلْنِي مِنْ وَرْثَةِ جَنَّةِ النَّعِيمِ, and the inheritors of heaven. وَاغْفِرْ لِأَبِي إِنَّهُ كَانَ مِنَ الضَّالِّينَ, and forgive my father, for my father has gone astray. And until he says, وَلَا تُخْزِنِي يَوْمَ يُبْعَثُونَ يَوْمَ لَا يَنْفَعُ مَالًا وَلَا بَنُونَ, that the day where neither money or children will avail you, إِلَّا مَنْ أَتَى اللَّهَ بِقَلْبٍ سَلِيمٍ, except those who come to Allah with a pure heart. This prayer is as if, and it was taken by the Prophet ﷺ as a prayer of consolation, repeated by Muslims, for millions of Muslims for centuries to come. This al-Du'a al-Ibrahimi, as it became known. And we know that the Quran then comments, as would be expected, about the fate of those who refused to abandon what they were doing because of the inherited practices and traditions of their fathers, that their fate in the hereafter is well known. So this is in 94, فَكُبْكِبُوا فِيهَا فَهُمْ وَالْغَاوُونَ وَجُنُودُ إِبْلِيسَ أَجْمَعِينَ, that they and the armies and the forces of Satan are all doomed. And this then takes us to 103 and 104, when we have the same refrain repeated again. إِنَّ فِي ذَلِكَ لَآيَةً وَمَا كَانَ أَكْثَرُهُم مُؤْمِنِينَ. In this is a sign, and most of them will not believe. وَإِنَّ رَبَّكَ لَهُوَ الْعَزِيزُ الرَّحِيمُ. Okay, so in the story of Ibrahim, we have Ibrahim who loves his father, is in agony because of his father, tries his best to guide his people. It doesn't work. What is the sin? What is the social ailment of the people of Ibrahim? The social ailment is, simply put, the following of customs and traditions, the blind following of customs and traditions. A different form of despotism. Still despotism. Moses, despotism, racism, and enslavement. Ibrahim, the despotism of traditions and customs that are followed blindly. Then the Quran takes us to the story of Nuh. And again, Nuh tells his people that إِنِّي لَكُمْ رَسُولٌ أَمِينٌ فَاتَّقُوا اللَّهَ وَأَطِيعُونَ وَمَا أَسْأَلُكُمْ عَلَيْهِ مِنْ أَجْرٍ إِنَّ أَجْرِي إِلَّا عَلَى رَبِّ الْعَالَمِينَ فَاتَّقُوا اللَّهَ وَأَطِيعُونَ. That I don't ask for anything in return. This is a message. So fear God and follow what I'm saying. And we know that the people, or most of his people, will not follow his message. But what is it that they say as justification in not following his message? They say to him, this is 111, قالوا أنؤمن لك واتبعك الأرذلون قال وما علمي بما كانوا يعملون إن حسابهم إلا على ربي لو تشعرون وما أنا بطارد المؤمنين إن أنا إلا نذير مبين قالوا لئن لم تنتهي يا نوح لتكونن من المرجومين قال ربي إن قومي كذبون. They are upset because those who followed Nuh are the low class, al-arzalun. It's not the rich people, it's not the cool people. It is the poorest and most uncool people in society. And in fact, what they tell Nuh is, maybe we'll listen to you if you get rid of the riffraff. And Nuh answers them by saying, it's not up to me to get rid of the riffraff, as you put it. Their accountability is with Allah. Whether it's like saying, you think they're riffraff, but maybe you're the riffraff. This is something, it's Allah knows the merit of people. But as far as I'm concerned, I can't kick out the believers. And then Noah knows that there's no hope. Those who have followed Noah are the ones who followed him, and he tries and tries and tries with his people. Nothing changes. His numbers remain pretty static. And he turns to Allah and says, Allah, qawmi kadhaboon. They don't believe me. What am I going to do? And we know the narrative of the story of Noah is that there is a flood that will punish his people, and we get at 122 and 123 again. At 121 إن في ذلك لآية وما كان أكثرهم مؤمنين وإن ربك لهو العزيز الرحيم. Again we get the same refrain. In this is a sign, and most of them will not believe, and Allah is Al-Aziz Al-Rahim. Okay, so what is the sin of the people of Noah? It's another form of despotism, another form of istibdad, but it's classism, tabaqiyya. So we're already getting a pattern here. People of Moses, we know what their problem is. They're racists and the enslaved people. People of Ibrahim is blind imitation to customs and traditions. People of Noah, they're classists. And the Quran immediately moves to the people of Hud. And the people of Hud, again, is قال لهم أخوهم هود, their brother Hud, connoting intimacy, closeness. Not that they were actual blood brothers, but meaning he is anchored in society. He cares about them. I am a prophet, and I don't, again, the same message. وَمَا أَسْأَلُكُمْ عَلَيْهِ مِنْ أَجْرٍ إِنَّ أَجْرِي إِلَّا عَلَى رَبِّ الْعَالَمِينَ. That I don't ask you for a compensation. I'm not doing this for my own benefit. This is for you. أتبنون بكل ريع آية تعبثون وتتخذون مصانع لعلكم تخلدون وإن بطشتم بطشتم جبارين. So the people of Hud are obsessed with building تبنون بكل ريع آية تعبثون, meaning that they spent a lot of money on luxury items in their buildings. Tall, fancy buildings. You know, they should of course see the high rises now in Mecca and Dubai and Abu Dhabi and so on. But a lot of money is wasted on stuff like that. And مصانع لعلكم تخلدون, they were obsessed with the idea of the fountain of youth and discovering the secret for eternal life. وَإِن بَطَشْتُمْ بَطَشْتُمْ جَبَّارِينَ, meaning you are cruel and savage when you use your power. This perfectly fits what the Emiratis and Saudis are doing in Yemen. They use force without mercy, and they build high-rise buildings full of fancy elitism. I mean, a more perfect and fitting description could not be. وَإِن بَطَشْتُمْ بَطَشْتُمْ جَبَّارِينَ. You're cruel people. When you use force, you completely forget mercy and compassion. You're brutal. And Hud goes on to tell his people, God has given you a lot of bounties, a lot of good. And you will be held accountable. And their answer is سواء علينا أو عصت أو لم تكن من الواعظين إن هذا إلا خلق الأولين. We don't care what you say, Hud. إن هذا إلا خلق الأولين means that this is the way that we've always done things. Our brutality, our cruelty, our use of force, this is our way of life. وَمَا نَحْنُ بِمُعَذَّبِينَ, and there will be no punishment, and they did not believe him, and as a result they were destroyed. And at 140 again, or 139 and 140 again, we get the same refrain. إِنَّ فِي ذَلِكَ لَآيَةً وَمَا كَانَ أَكْثَرُهُم مُؤْمِنِينَ وَإِنَّ رَبَّكَ لَهُوَ الْعَزِيزُ الرَّحِيمُ. In this is a sign, and most of them will not believe, and Allah is Aziz Rahim. So, Hud are also despots, another form of despotism. But their main sin, yes, elitism, but batsh. Batsh is literally means to be cruel and merciless in the way you use force. There are people without mercy. Then right away, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala takes us to the people of Salih, Thamud. And again, Salih is described as أخوهم. This is 142. إِذْ قَالَ لَهُمْ أَخُوهُمْ صَالِحٌ أَلَا تَتَّقُونَ. If their brother Salih told him, don't you fear? Same language. وَمَا أَسْأَلُكُمْ عَلَيْهِ مِنْ أَجْرٍ. And I don't ask you for compensation. So again, what is Allah telling us here? It's the same message over and over, over and over. But it is not just a message about monotheism. It's a message about social justice as well. So with Salih, after he told them that reaffirmed the same message, he reminds them, you build fancy homes, you spend a lot on yourself and on luxuries, and you don't think about things like whether you're corrupting the earth or not corrupting the earth. In other words, you don't have a very strong compass about justice or injustice. You indulge. And they respond to him, قالوا إنما أنت من المسحرين. You're bewitched. Moses is called a majnoon, insane. In Ibrahim, he's treated like a criminal. It says, that if you don't stop, we're going to stone you. Right? With Noah, they say you've lost your mind. You're senile. You're talking nonsense because you go around with the riffraff. And with Hud and Salih, again, the point is they always respond with an ad hominem attack, attacking the personality of the messenger, and oblivious to the message itself. So the test given to those people is fascinating, right? They defy Salih. They say, okay, well, if you're truthful, have a camel come out of this rock. And Allah obliges, and a miracle is performed. A camel suddenly appears. But they are told that they have to share their water with this camel. The camel has certain days in which the camel can drink from the well, and on these days they're not supposed to drink from the well. But on the alternative days, they drink from the well and the camel doesn't drink from the well. Better minds than mine paused long and hard as to why that test. And Qawm Thamud are arrogant, yes, but they're also greedy. They see no reason why they can share anything with anyone. And when Allah gives them that test, that there is something in this world that you don't have the right to indulge in to your heart's content, but you actually have to exercise restraint, even if you don't understand the logic of this restraint. But it is not just free for you to use as you please. They fail. They kill the camel. They say, we're not going to share our water with the camel, we're just going to kill the camel. And they're destroyed as a result. And again, Allah comments on this by saying, "Inna fi dhalika ayah." And this is a sign, and most of them will not believe, and Allah is Al-Aziz Al-Rahim. So, the sin of Qawm Salih, Thamud, is extreme indulgence and greed. They don't share, and they were rather infamous for not wanting to share. Then right away, Surah Al-Shu'ara moves to Qawm Lut, the people of Lot. And the same message, with the same words, إني لكم رسول أمين فاتقوا الله وأطيعون وما أسألكم عليه من أجر إن أجري إلا على رب العالمين. Same message again. Fear God. I don't ask you for compensation. And Lut says, أتأتون الذكران من العالمين وتذرون ما خلق لكم ربكم من أزواجكم بل أنتم قوم عادون. What is the story with the people of Lot? This tribe had adopted something very bizarre. They're married. They have wives. But they adopted a social practice of raping any strangers that they can put their hands on, whether they come to the tribe of Lut or they raid along the way. And not just raping, but sodomizing. And not just sodomizing, but sodomizing the men and the women. Now, why is it that they sodomize all those that they put their hands on. It's an expression of extreme dominance and power. We are going to sodomize your men, and we're going to sodomize your women, and we're going to sodomize your children, and there's nothing you can do about it. So the message that they're sending is, look at us, we're all powerful. We literally screw you. Quite literally. And there's nothing you can do about it. And especially for the traditions and practices of that region, you're supposed to treat guests extremely well, not sexually assault them and sodomize them. But the people of Lot, that's what they do. If you come to their town, they're going to rape you. And if you pass by their town and you're from a weak tribe, not one of the powerful tribes, they're going to raid your caravan, and if they put their hands on you, they're going to sodomize you. And they became very famous for that. And we know that the people of Lot get punished and are destroyed. And again, إِنَّ فِي ذَلِكَ لَآيَةً, this is a sign, and most of them will not believe. وَإِنَّ لَرَبَّكَ لَهُوَ الْعَزِيزُ الرَّحِيمُ, and Allah is the Aziz al-Rahim. So, what the people of Lot, again, are mustabiddin, they're despots. But what is their particular crime and sin? Sexual assault and ugly acts of dominance. Then we come to Shu'aib. Shu'aib, Allah doesn't say akhuhum, doesn't say their brother. But simply, Shu'aib has the same message. Inni lakum rasulun ameen. فَاتَّقُوا اللَّهَ وَأَطِيعُونَ, the same message, verbatim. وَمَا أَسْأَلُكُمْ عَلَيْهِ مِنْ أَجْرٍ إِنْ أَجْرِي إِلَّا عَلَى رَبِّ الْعَالَمِينَ. I don't ask for compensation. The message that Shu'aib has is rather subtle and nuanced. أَوْفُوا الكَّيْلَ وَلَا تَكُونُوا مِنَ الْمُخْسِرِينَ وزنوا بالقسطاس المستقيم ولا تبخسوا الناس أشياءهم ولا تعثوا في الأرض مفسدين. The message to his people is, don't cheat in commerce. Don't pursue fraudulent practices in your transactions so you can maximize profit. And don't deny people their rights. And by doing so, you are causing corruption on earth. And the response is cold and arrogant. Get real, Shu'aib. You're just a human being just like us. It's like saying, we say, وَمَا أَنْتَ إِلَّا بَشَرٌ مِثْلَنَا. It's like saying, we know that you're just as human as we are. We know that we don't buy it that you don't want to cheat and make money. Get real. We don't believe you. It's when it says, we don't believe that any of these claims of lofty justice that you are coming up with. And you know what? If you want God's punishment to befall us, go ahead. We don't care. Meaning that they don't believe it. So it's fascinating. What is the sin of Shu'aib's people? Fraud, injustice, but it is not the type of injustice that we saw with the people of Moses or the people of Hud or the people of Lut, which is violent injustice. This is transactional, commercial injustice. And in fact, Shu'aib seems to, it's like Shu'aib was sent the equivalent of a prophet being sent to Wall Street. And that's why Shu'aib is not described as akhuhum. These people had no close relations. All they knew was money. And all they cared about was money, and all they loved is money. They had no brothers. It's like if you are sent to talk to Wall Street, you don't go and say, I'm your brother. That would be ridiculous. It's everything is, there's no tradition, there's no tribal relations, there's no genealogy, there's no clan, there's nothing. It's all money relations. So, 7 forms of despotism, 7 forms of istibdad. Moses, racism and enslavement. Ibrahim, blind imitation and unthinking habitualism. Nuh, classism. Hud, cruelty and barbarity. Saleh, greed and a refusal to understand that you exist in the world to share its resources. Lut, sexual aggression and again forms of exercising power, but in a particularly cruel and tortuous manner. And Shu'aib is fraud and injustice and failure to be. Now, among the people that the people of Shu'aib resemble the most the people of Quraysh, except that Shu'aib didn't come from one of the families that controlled the finances and the money in his tribe, but the Prophet Muhammad did. He came from the tribe of Quraysh, one of the tribes that actually dominated the finances of Mecca. So it's remarkable. Surah Al-Shu'ara takes the Prophet on a journey, saying, listen, each of these prophets confronted a form of despotism, istibdad, and nuances of injustice and corruption on this earth. And in every one, Allah creates a sign, as Allah creates signs all the times. But understand, most people will not believe. This is the way it is. we're not finishing the surah yet, but with this surah I'm forced to skip ahead and go back and forth for reasons I think you'll see. So when we get to this point, this is the point where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells the Prophet ﷺ, okay, do you understand upon what type of people demons descend? Now, of course, in traditional tafsir, they'll tell you that what Allah is saying is that Mecca accused the Prophet of being a sorcerer. And Allah is telling the Prophet that, well, I know you're not a sorcerer because it's not demons that visit you, but sorcerers are visited by demons. But of course, I mean, yeah, but that's I mean, that's just, I mean, very elementary or rather superficial. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying demons do play a role with ashab al-ifk, those who are liars and who lying is a way of life for them. And it is at that point that Allah mentions the poets. In traditional tafsir, they'll tell you that Allah is saying that, Muhammad, you're not a poet. Because, look, you speak the truth and poets don't. But that's not convincing. What is the role played by poets in that day and age? The role played by poets is that they are a critical instrument of the mechanism of despotism in their day and age. They are the PR branch of the state. So the poets of back then are like the newscasters, or, you know, every despot has people that go on the net that propagate and defend their despotism. Every despot have people that go on TV shows and propagate their despotism, that defend it, that justify it, that legitimate it. It's like Goebbels for Hitler. These are the poets that the Quran is talking about. It is not that the Quran is condemning the practice of poetry. The Quran is condemning the PR instrument of despots that legitimate and justify what the people of the Pharaoh, what the people of Ibrahim, what the people of Moses, what the people of Shu'aib, what the people of Saleh are doing. These are the propagandists, the marketers of despotism. There are several things to note here, and they all come from the context of Surah Al-Shu'ara. When the first Surah Al-Shu'ara is revealed, the Prophet ﷺ is affected by it so much that he goes in the middle of Mecca and he announces, speaks publicly, and he says, I avail none of you nothing. None of it is up to me. And he even talks to his members of his own family and he says, believe, because I can avail you nothing. directs his speech, even says, even Fatima, my own daughter, I can do nothing for her. He gets the message that it is all up to Allah and that he can do nothing to either save someone or not save someone. But the impact of Surah Al-Shu'ara is also gleaned in when the Prophet ﷺ comments that says, if people إنما تنصرون بضعفائكم, a people is made victorious or successful in direct proportion to how the most weak and oppressed among them are treated. In other words, Allah, whether you are blessed as a social project or not, it is exactly according to what rights you give the arzalun, the weakest and the most powerless. Again, in relation to Surah Al-Shu'ara, the Prophet ﷺ said, لا تنظروا إلى عيوب الناس كأنكم أرباب وانظروا إلى عيوبكم كأنكم عبيد فإنما الناس مبتلى ومعافى فارحموا أهل البلاء وسلوا الله العافية. Don't look to the faults of people as if you are gods, but look to your own faults as if you are slaves. For people are either afflicted with a test or not. And if they are afflicted with a test, then they deserve your compassion. And pray to Allah for afiyah, for your own protection and your own well-being. A remarkable reaction to Surah Al-Shu'ara, right? Don't think, distance yourself thoroughly from the idea that you are godlike. لا تنظروا لعيوب الناس كأنكم أرباب. Don't look at people's faults as if you're gods. You're not. Focus on your own faults. The Prophet ﷺ is distancing himself from despotism and its mechanisms and its processes. This hadith, by the way, is reported to have been said in reaction to in batashtum batashtum jabbarin. Among the other very fascinating reports about all revealed all around Surah Al-Shu'ara, that Maymun bin Mahran meets Al-Hasan radiyallahu anhu, and he tells Al-Hasan, advise me. And Al-Hasan says to him, وَمَا أَغْنَ عَنْهُمْ مَا كَانُوا يُمَتَّعُونَ. That's your advice. And this means, and this is of course the ayah from Surah Al-Shu'ara, that it availed them nothing what they enjoyed in this earth. And that's all he told him. He said, reflect upon this. That's all you need. And it is also reported that Umar bin Abdul Aziz, the so-called fifth rightly guided caliph, that he would also read Surah Al-Shu'ara and particularly this ayah, ما أغنى عنهم ما كانوا يمتعون, before he would start any judgment council where he was adjudicating between people. So again, it was understood as core to the processes of justice. Moreover, when one of the often often reported traditions associated with Surah Al-Shu'ara, that what a companion was told, one of the companions was told that his brother is committing public sins. And he cites verses in Surah Al-Shu'ara, especially وَانذِرْ عَشِيرَتَكَ الْأَقْرَبِينَ, and then he says, إِنَّمَا أَبْغُضُ عَمَلَهُ وَإِلَّا فَهُوَ أَخِي, that I hate what he does, but he's my brother. And Abu Darda says, الأخ في الله لا يبغض لزلته وإنما يبغض عمله, that your brother in Islam, don't hate your brother in Islam, hate what they do, but not them. Differentiate between what they do and them. That gave that repeated usage of أخوهم, their brother, a further nuance, as especially the Sufi-esque tafsir know that the Prophet ﷺ never hated the people who refused to follow him. Hated what they did, but not them. And that distinction is critical for proper morality in Islam. There's one more thing left, so let's pray and then we'll do that one more thing and inshallah finish the surah. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. So notice something that we pointed out to at the very beginning, when and this is 223. It says, على من تنزل الشياطين, that when Allah talks about demons descending, and then if you notice at 223, وَأَكْثَرُهُمْ كَاذِبُونَ, most of them are liars. And actually in the commentators stop at that expression, most of them are liars, because there are traditions in which the Prophet ﷺ is asked why in Surah Al-Shu'ara it says most of them are liars instead of they're liars outright. And the Prophet ﷺ is reported to have said يَخْلِطُونَ الصِّدْقَ مَعَ مِئَةِ كَذِبَةٍ, that they mix, that demons in fact communicate information from the world of ghaib to sorcerers, but they mix a piece of truth with 100 lies. And this is generally true for, the phenomena known as psychics and fortune tellers and so on, that they're in contact with something they don't understand, and what they're in contact with, could give them a bit of truth, but mixed with a great deal of lies. Okay, so that, just so you know, that this is part of what. So Surah Al-Shu'ara it's interesting that in traditional tafsir they'll always tell you that it starts out with recognizing the agony and pain that the Prophet ﷺ is going through, and then it basically tells him stories of past prophets to console him. And then some even went as far as saying that the verses about poets were revealed in Medina, not Mecca, which I think is completely unfounded. That it is completely untrue that these verses were revealed in the Medina period, and and basically to defend the Prophet against the charge of sorcery and poetry. But I think that misses entirely the point. And the fact that, yes, the stories of the prophets are repeated again and again in the Quran, but each time they are repeated, it's from a different point of view to emphasize a different message. And in Surah Al-Shu'ara, what it is emphasizing is the repeated pattern of prophets carrying the same message, in essence, the same message, against an apparatus of istibdad, of an apparatus of despotism, with various permutations of injustice, different forms and manifestations of injustice. And the essential confrontation is always between the prophets and repeatedly the powerful. The prophets always representing the disempowered in confrontation with the powerful. In all of the 7 narratives we get in Surah Al-Shu'ara. And then that critical instrumentality that the powerful, in order to sustain their institutions of despotism and injustice, rely on spin masters, on PR institutions, and on propaganda, like Hitler's Goebbels, his minister of propaganda. And the spin masters are the shu'ara of the time of the Prophet. They're the shu'ara. In our age, they wouldn't be the poets, obviously. There would be everything else that the powerful uses to socialize people into accepting their disempowerment and accepting the injustices that they live under as legitimate and appropriate. And because of these spin masters, the majority, and notice that although it's telling the Prophet the majority will not believe, Mecca will officially become Muslim. Most people will officially, the majority in fact, will become Muslim. But does the majority become believers? That's a different game. Because once the Prophet ﷺ dies, we go back to human institutions. And human institutions, the powerful dominate and create spin masters. The most amazing thing about Surah Al-Shu'ara is like Taha and like Dukhan and the Shu'ara. It's revealed in the Mecca period, although it is really talking about doctrine that is at the heart of institution building within a state or within power structures. So it is addressing something way before it becomes at the heart, pressing and relevant. If Muslims understand the moral message of Surah Al-Shu'ara, they would realize it is a cry against despotism, against classism, against elitism, against racism. And it would teach Muslims to be inherently distrustful of the spin masters, those who justify the abuses of power as legitimate and just. And alhamdulillah, that's Surah Al-Shu'ara.